Hello and welcome to part 29 of the Fun with Foundation Paper Piecing series. We're doing the kite this week, and I've prepared my pieces on foundation paper piecing paper. That's not easy to say quick. And I've also organised all of the bits that I cut out according to the templates. The template, the cutting list, the pattern, etc. are all available to download from my blog gentlemancrafter.com. So as ever, we're working on the back of the pattern, and the first piece goes on right side facing up, and I've also included a red dotted positioning guide for that piece. So that's why you've got a mixture of red dots and black dashes. So that goes in there. I'm just using a tiny bit of repositionable glue to stick that in place and hold it there. And then part 2 is going to go on top of that, but right side facing down. So you've got to make sure it's orientated correctly and that you're matching up the correct sides. Then I'm going to pin it in place. It's not strictly necessary. You could get away with just winging it, but there is the chance that things will shift and move. So I prefer to pin. Now we're going to stitch along the line that separates those two sections. It's a very short line. All the sections are numbered, all the templates are numbered, so they should all match up. Slightly differently to the way I've done it so far, but I thought this might make it easier to organise and stitch your parts on. Hopefully it'll help. Let me know if it does or doesn't. If you do want to get further involved with this series, I do have a Facebook group that accompanies this series where people are sharing what they're making. It's been a bit quiet over summer, but that's expectable. There's a lot of things going on in the world right now, isn't there? Okay, now you could just finger press this, but I chose to use the iron. I actually forgot to turn the iron on, so stand by for a choppy edit. There we go. Anyway, so now I'm bringing the template back over, and I'm going to turn it over and just use a piece of card to line up between the first two sections and the third section. Fold it back on the dashed line, and then use my add a quarter ruler to butt up against that piece of card and trim any excess fabric. There probably won't be any because we're using templates, but this is a good habit to get into if you're going to be doing scrappy foundation paper piecing, where you just use random bits of fabric. Now part 3, again, make sure it lines up with the pattern and then match up the sides that need stitching. Always right side facing down after that first piece, and again pin it in place. I'd love to hear how you're getting on with this series, and if you are making things and just building up a library or making a larger project, let me know in the comments on YouTube or on my website, on the blog. Preferably on the post that accompanies this one, otherwise it might seem a bit random. Obviously, just a reminder, I'm using a very short stitch spacing, and I'm tack stitching or reverse stitching at the beginning and end of each line to secure those in place, making sure to stitch on the dashed lines, not either side. Trimming the threads as I go to stay neat and tidy. Although if you saw my workspace right now, you'd probably not think I was neat and tidy. So we're folding that back, and that should cover that entire section and meet the solid outline. I'm keeping the little templates, by the way, because obviously they can be reused. If you want to fussy cut, you could always print them onto tracing paper or even thin mylar, and then you've got some nice long-lasting templates if you want to redo this, or even cut them from different fabrics to create a larger project. In the download, I've included a chart that gives you an idea of how many blocks you need to make for certain sized projects. So if you are going to tackle something bigger, you'll know how many 3-inch blocks to make. This one obviously comes in 2 sections, but the finished block will be 3 inches. Sometimes we have to work in sections because otherwise the pattern just wouldn't work. Folding back and pressing. And then, as I've shown you already, just making sure it lines up with the pattern and then flipping it on the side that needs lining up. It's a good way to work, otherwise it can be confusing. Okay, so we're going to press this back and then we've got just one more piece to go for this half. I'm not going to show you both halves because pretty much they're exactly the same. There is a slightly different stitching order for the second section, but it is the same principles and process. So again, just trimming back. This does serve a purpose. It's not just to stay neat and tidy. It gives you a nice straight edge and it gives you the correct 1/4 inch seam allowance to line your next piece up against. Obviously the choice of fabrics is yours. For this particular pattern, we're just using 3 different fabrics. If you wanted though, you could do each of those kite sections in a totally different colour, maybe even a rainbow. And then the outer sections in white. So you've just then got a quilt made of rainbow kites. How cool would that be? Ooh, that's an idea for next year. Okay, so pressing that last section in place. And that's half of our kite done. What I'm going to do next is trim down to the solid outline. And that gets rid of any excess bits that we don't need. Okay, so there we go, there's the first half. So as I say, you'd repeat that in a very similar fashion for the second half, and then badoom badoom, you've got 2 halves. And then basically you're going to stitch those 2 together to form the completed block. So placing one side, right side facing down on the other, and then stitching on this seam allowance that will join the two kite sections together. So in my case, because I'm working upside down here, it's the left hand side, but if you're working the correct way up, you will most likely find the seam allowance on the right. Depends which side you've got facing up and whether you're upside down or not. Make sure that center is spot on before you start. Spoiler alert, I didn't, so it's slightly off for mine, but I thought I'd throw in that tip anyway. What's that phrase? Do as I say, not as I do. I think that pretty much sums this one up. When you stitched down that side, trim your threads, unpin, and then we're going to start pressing out the center seam. Now I am removing the paper from the seam allowance here. I have been finding recently that this may help in certain circumstances when you're trying to press open seams that have got a lot of bulk in them. So first I'm actually just using a finger presser and my fingers to separate this seam out and try and get it open with everything on the correct sides. If you find it absolutely too bulky, you can trim away little bits here and there to help reduce that bulk. And then when you've got it open, use your iron to fully press that seam open. And there we go, there's week 29. I hope you'll enjoy making that and show me what you make. In the meantime, thanks for watching, and please remember to give the video a thumbs up before you go today.